Our censorship and propaganda video series teaches you how to identify and circumvent censorship and propaganda that costs you time, money, liberty, and sometimes your life, and find the products, services, leaders, and public policy that work better, cost less, and empower you. How to Tell the Earth is Curved from Personal Experience, version 2.0, November 2021. This is a conception of the flat Earth from the 1800s, known as the Orlando Ferguson Flat Earth, and it reflects the quasi-biblical flat Earth with four corners. How do we know that the Earth is curved today? How can you tell from personal experience? There are many examples in the history of man and actually in the history of science where something that's widely repeated, everyone knows, has turned out not to be true. It was widely believed that cigarettes were good for you, that they improved your breathing back 1920s, 1930s, a long time ago, just as an example. We should check our beliefs against our personal experiences. And where we cannot confirm them from personal experience, that doesn't mean we must reject them, but we must be cautious about them. Even if everybody says it's true, everybody can be wrong. They're relying on authority, on what they see in the news media. Even scientific authorities have been grossly wrong many times in history. So can we tell that the Earth is curved from everyday experience in the modern world? And if you're a traveler, you fly, for example, as I do, from San Francisco to the East Coast, to New York City, or Boston, or Washington, D.C., and back, you actually can tell from your everyday experience, especially when you fly at the time of sunrise or sunset, that the Earth is curved. Now, that doesn't prove it's a sphere. You have to do more to get to that point, but you can tell that it is not flat, that it is not a disk, that it works differently. So how does that work? Well, it is based on time zones. And in time zones, we can see that the sun's elevation changes and is different in different parts of the country, but we can also see the sun moving through the sky as we travel on an aircraft, or if we have a smartphone, for example, set to San Francisco time, and we drive at a leisurely pace or take the train or something like that across the country, we will find that noon occurs at different times in different time zones compared to 12 noon in San Francisco. Or conversely, if we started from New York and drove across the country, we would see that noon, when the sun is overhead, is occurring at different times in different parts of the country from New York City. And this is obvious evidence of the curvature of the Earth, and it's quite substantial. In fact, on a perfectly flat Earth, we expect to see sunrise at exactly the same times in San Francisco and New York City, because the sun is popping up from around the edge of the Earth, over the edge of the Earth. That's not actually what we see. On a curved Earth, for example, we will see sunrise occur 3 hours earlier in New York City, and it'll still be dark in San Francisco. If you happen to be flying across the country during sunrise or sunset, you'll actually see the sunrise or sunset occur at an unexpected time compared to where you started out the flight or where you're ending up. You know, it's clear evidence of something. Now, one way to try to get around that is to claim that, well, the sun is flying very low. Remember, when sunrise occurs, we know that the sun is very close to the horizon, right? So for the sunrise to be occurring at different times in New York City and San Francisco, or a different time when we happen to be flying, and we're down here when we're flying, then the sun must be flying very close to the Earth's surface, probably less than a degree elevation at sunrise, and it has to be seen that way all across the country. So the point here is, suppose the sun is very close and it's relatively weak, so that over here, when we see sunrise in New York City, the light has attenuated to the point that it's still dark in San Francisco. All right? So that would be one way to say, well, why does everybody see the sun coming up but at different times? Well, for that to be true, okay, the problem with that is the sun must cross the United States at about 800 miles per hour for the 3-hour difference, and it would be doing this at a very, very low elevation, so probably under 40 miles above the Earth, and it would travel across in 3 hours at 800 miles per hour. Now think about what that means. Consider, quote, midday in New York City. Well, at some point, that 41-mile high sun, or 30 miles or whatever it is going to be at 35 degrees elevation. We see that every day, actually. And it's flying 800 miles an hour across New York City, or thereabouts. In 6 minutes, it will cover 100 miles. It will soar over New York City and end up on the other side. In just a few minutes, it'll go from the 35-degree elevation on one side to the other side, and actually gets much worse. That doesn't fit with what we see at all. In fact, this would produce really strange things where the time zones were a few miles in width. And so actually your time zone, like on Long Island, near the tip of Long Island, would be very different from Pennsylvania, never mind California. That's, of course, not at all what we see. And the reason for that is actually, of course, the sun very high above the Earth. And in fact, if the Earth is curved, we think the sun is about 93 million miles from the Earth, and the light is reaching the Earth in parallel lines. And the reason that we see the different elevations is the curvature of the Earth. And that's what we're actually observing as we're flying or traveling across country. That's why the sunrise occurs at different times in different cities, in San Francisco and New York City. The Earth is curved. Now, this is not obvious, contrary to a lot of popular science, which often ridicule people for thinking it was flat, especially in the ancient times. But it's actually very hard to figure out that the Earth is not flat. The Earth doesn't feel like it's moving, except during earthquakes, of course, which are rare. And it looks flat. It's exactly flat. If you walk around 20, 30 miles around where you live, you cannot tell that the Earth is curved. It doesn't appear to be curved. In fact, if you live by the seashore, I grew up by the seashore in Massachusetts, you don't, for example, at least with modern ships and sailboats, which are 30, 50 feet tall sometimes, you'll sometimes hear these claims that you can see the tip of an old schooner, like one of the clipper ships from the 1800s. You could sometimes see it vanishing beneath the horizon. I don't know if that's true, but I've never seen anything like that. I never saw anything like that living near the coast. If it does happen, it's very rare. Remember that you have to have a very, very good visibility to see that if it did occur. And in ancient times, nobody had or very few people had telescopes. As far as we know, telescopes are quite recent. So again, it's not at all obvious that the Earth is not flat. In fact, there's a whole flat Earth theory community or people on the internet. However, you can tell the Earth is curved, and people have known it for a very, very long time. Aristotle knew it. It's in his astronomy book, and he gives the estimate of the Earth being a sphere about 8,000 miles in diameter. There's, I believe, strong evidence that it was known in ancient Sumeria, which is what's now Iraq, and was actually 6,000 years ago. We don't know if the people that built Stonehenge, which is about the same time frame as the Sumerians, knew the Earth was curved, but it's very probable that they did. So Stonehenge was some sort of, probably religious, but a solar observatory is what we think it was. Well, one of the things you can do, and you don't have to have a big stone building like this to do this, is you can determine the elevation of the sun from the shadow that a pillar like this, or a tree stump or whatever, gives. You can figure out the elevation of the sun. You can actually figure its azimuth as well. Again, from the shadow, you can do this. It's like a sundial. It allows you to observe the position of the sun safely without looking directly at the sun. And of course, this design here, this sundial-like design of Stonehenge, which is the most sophisticated of these stone circles, we think, in the British Isles, all of these arrangements provide mechanisms by which you could, if you wish to, determine what day of the year it is and the elevation and location of the sun. Now, there are circles, not as fancy as this one, all over the British Isles and Brittany and France. That's over a difference in latitude of over 500 miles, 600 miles. It's very possible that whoever built these things was able to figure out that the Earth was somewhat curved. They may not have gotten that far, but they could have done it. And the way the ancients, despite the evident technological difficulties, they didn't have modern clocks, they didn't have air travel. Travel was very slow, even on oceans and rivers, which were probably the fastest way of getting from one place to another. They could use the elevation angle of the sun to determine that the Earth was curved, and they would see that this elevation angle, which you can infer from pillars or from rods or staffs or wooden things that you build, they could tell that the position of the sun was inconsistent with and contradicted a flat Earth, with the sun flying over relatively close, somewhere probably a few thousand miles above the Earth. If they thought it through, that's where they would have expected that the Earth or the sun god or whatever was flying. But actually, what you see is not consistent with that, and it shows that the Earth is curved. And this is how the Greeks and the Sumerians and other people figured out that, yes, indeed, the Earth was curved, and they figured out it was a sphere. But it wasn't at all easy to do, and it's not easy to do today unless you carefully think about what you're seeing with the position of the sun, and you have to travel substantial distances, probably several hundred miles at the minimum, to really see it. Of course, many people travel like that, like I do, between the coasts. So we can be pretty sure the Earth is curved, and indeed, now I'm not showing in this video how to show it's 8,000 miles in diameter approximately and that sort of thing. You'd actually have to do a lot more travel and make careful measurements to figure that out. These ancient astronomers, or in Sumeria, probably did that. The Greeks did it, and possibly the people who built Stonehenge did it. So in conclusion, the Earth is curved, and it probably is a sphere 8,000 miles in diameter, roughly spherical, roughly 8,000 miles in diameter. If I'm able to do some more videos than this, I may show precisely how we can measure this with modern tools like smartphones and airplane travel and that kind of thing. But for now, I just want to give you the notion that when you travel across country, around the world, and you're watching the sun change its angle of elevation dramatically as you fly, because it will change faster because you're flying into or away from the sun, typically, you'll see these things changing. You can actually see the sunrise and sunset occur at different times from what you would expect based on the city you start your flight in. These things show that the Earth is curved, and we cannot explain what we see away simply by having a low-flying sun. In fact, it points in the other direction that the sun is very far away. Here are some credits for some of the pictures that I showed. The Orlando Ferguson flat Earth, the computer-generated image of Stonehenge, and the image this is from 2008, the picture I showed with the shadows of Stonehenge, and a Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, a NASA picture of the sun, of the Earth rising over the moon. Our censored search website and service enables you to search censored and shadow banned websites for suppressed information. We offer transparency on what the search ranking algorithms are doing and tools to help you separate fact from disinformation. We offer both a free service for everyone and a paid professional service with full access to our tools and the ability to customize the search algorithms for your needs. Our business model is end-user funded to avoid either direct control or subconscious bias from advertisers. Our censored search service is intended as a complement to increasingly censored advertising-funded search engines, such as Google, Yahoo, Bing, and even DuckDuckGo, which appears to be increasingly shadow banning alternative content. We cannot duplicate many useful features of the advertising-funded search engines yet, nor is this needed. Use our search engine for censored and shadow-banned content. Get the other side or sides of the story. Remember, there are often more than two sides to a story. Inclusion in our search engine is not an endorsement. We include sites based on evidence of censorship or shadow banning in our judgment. We attempt to be neutral and provide tools to our users to evaluate and verify the content without relying on our fallible judgment. There is evidence that powerful interests actively spread disinformation to alternative sites to make identifying suppressed factual information difficult and discredit factual information through guilt by association. We are developing tools to fight these active disinformation tactics. Give us a try at censored-search.com, censored-search.net, or censored-search.org. We welcome constructive feedback. How can we serve you better? Bookmark our site as the censorship is growing by leaps and bounds. You may need us more in the future. Let your friends and colleagues know. You can access more advanced features and support development of a transparent, verifiable search engine that works for you and not giant advertisers such as Big Pharma by becoming a paid subscriber. If you want to support our development work, subscribe now.